Yep.
Okay, good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us. We appreciate your interest and support, and welcome to Matthew Hodge, who's going to do the presentation this morning from, I guess, a cool but sunny Italy, and he'll tell us a bit more about that later. Matthew is presently a third-year PhD student at the University of Bologna in Italy, and he embarked on his current journey after 8 years, or about 8 years, working as an exploration geologist, mostly in Africa. So his prior fieldwork experience includes time with Randgold Barrick, Norgold, and remote sensing, remote exploration services, working in Mali and Guinea and West Africa, Zambia, Botswana, and South Africa. Most of his focus has been on orogenic gold, base metals, and diamonds. He has an MSc from the University of Cape Town, and his current PhD research is looking at the evolution of brittle deformation and crystalline basement rocks on a small island off central Norway, using field studies, stochastic 3D modeling, and geochronology to understand polyphase fracture formation through space and time. He's based in Bologna, as we said. Naturally, it's easy to be distracted from work. So when possible, Matthew enjoys getting out and exploring Italy. So over to you, Matthew. Thank you.
Thanks very much for the introduction, John. Appreciate it. And thank you as well for letting me come speak. I hope I can stay within the time. Yeah, I'll just share a bit of what I've been working on for the last 2.5 years or so. I'll sort of go between a bit of geotourism, some science, and I'll also just show a few things about Italy at the end, just to complete the story. But yeah, just to start. So my project, it's been based in Norway, and I spent quite a bit of time here in Trondheim, which is this picture actually. This is Trondheim Fjord, which is the third largest fjord in Norway, actually. You can see Trondheim sitting just nestled in there, which is an old Viking city. But yeah, I was visiting the Norwegian Geological Survey, which I'll talk a bit more about soon. So just to give a bit of background on Norwegian geology, just to add some context to my project, I just want to talk a little bit about the Caledonian orogeny, just to, yeah, it's a bit complex, but I'll try and keep it simple as possible. But we had basically a collision between two supercontinent fragments, which was Laurentia and Baltica, which then eventually turned into Eurasia. And of course, you can see Greenland sitting there. So it was this collision that occurred around about 400 million years ago, between Greenland and Norway, more or less. And the best modern analogy for this collision is the Himalayas, where you have India obviously colliding with Eurasia. But it was a really significant orogeny. It's stretched all the way from Svalbard in the north, all the way through to the Appalachian Mountains in North America, through Scotland, which is the most famous sort of type area for it. So just to add sort of a time, some time slices, these are cross sections with Baltica, Norway on this side, and Greenland, Laurentia on that side. So you had basically from the Ordovician through to the Silurian, a process of Laurentia overthrusting above what's known as the Iapetus Ocean, which was an ancient ocean which was destroyed effectively. And you had the Baltica and the continental lithosphere being subducted below Laurentia. And during this process, you had a series of naps that formed, these thrust naps, which are highly deformed, some of them involving some very high pressure rocks, some eclogites. And you also had these plutonic events, these arc magmatic events, which are most connected to my project. So by about 430 to 400, you had the whole Caledonian orogeny sort of complete. And you can imagine this whole crustal section sort of occurring like this old telescope would telescope together and close up. So yeah. And this slide's a bit complicated, but I don't want to get into too much detail. But effectively, you have the very old rocks, the Baltica, they call the autochthonous basement, being overlain by a series of naps, which go from continental affinity through to the oceanic affinity, and eventually coming from Greenland. And these all thrust up and over the old Baltica basement. And so the Norwegian geology, you're basically getting a cross section through this nap pile, like a cake, basically. And this slot eventually got over thickened, and the crust wanted to rebound. So we had late Caledonian collapse and thermal cooling, basically. And this more or less happened in the Devonian through to the Carboniferous. And you could effectively say it sort of triggered the eventual breakup of Greenland and Norway much later in the Paleogene. But what's quite specific with my project is these major extensional faults which form these Devonian basins, these half-graben basins, and you can see very distinct conglomerate infill. Yeah, which I'll talk about a little bit more. So anyways, so why this place for my projects? Well, just to place Smyrla Island a bit more on the in the location. We can see it here. It's sort of along central Norway, and the island is bound by, well, as you can see, it underwent quite a lot of tectonic activity. But the island itself is bound by these major structures, such as the Moray-Trondelag fault complex to the southeast, and these series of major extensional faults, as well as structural highs, which form these different platforms, such as the Frøya High, and a series of basins. And I've got a cross section, which I'll show you shortly, highlights these different components. But the island itself, as I was saying, it's formed by these magmatic arcs, the Back Caledonian age. Series of gabbros, diorites, Monza granites. I've got some pictures I'll show you. And then you get some supercrustals, such as these limestones and moles and marbles, as well as those Devonian conglomerates. And then these also get over cross-cut by much later Jurassic material. But why Smyrla? So we're trying to understand this island as an onshore analog for these offshore features, which are buried and blind features. And the island itself, although our crop is not great, I'll show you now, but we had 4 diamond drill holes, which the Norwegian Geological Survey, or the Geological Survey of Norway, I should say it properly, they drilled on the island, so I could look at. So Smyrla, as I was showing, is, as we believe it's to be quite a good onshore analog for one of these features. So this is that cross section. I'll just go back on that line. And as you can see, it's buried below much younger basin sediments. But it's of interest as a potential unconventional reservoir feature. Yeah. So to go and to look at this, I went originally, as I said, to the NGU, the Geological Survey of Norway, right at the beginning of my PhD in the winter, which was quite extraordinary time of the year to go. But in the NGU, they got this wonderful map, which they have on the wall. And you can see Trondheim is sitting sort of right here. But the map's made up of all these different rock types from across Norway. But anyways, that's a bit of a side note. So obviously, that time of the year is quite brutal. Very little sunlight. We had about 2 to 3 hours a day. I was also fortunate during that time to get out of Trondheim with one of my Swedish colleagues. Took me to the Heita, I think they call it, the little cabin up in the mountains. But it was quite a different environment from working in Guinea, where I was just before the PhD, in Africa, in that West African heat, to being in some serious snow for the first time in my life. But yeah, anyways, so that time I spent mostly logging drill core in the basement. They got this little core facility there. Way too cold to do it outside in a core yard. But I spent several weeks looking at these different cores at the centimetric scale. And yeah, quite an interesting experience there, actually. Very different to what I did before. But just to give you some idea what some of these features look like in drill core. So I've just plotted these up in 3D for you. And we had these drill cores that went through some yeah, quite significant structures, which I've just got some photos of, such as these epidote prehnite cataclasites and vein stockworks, as well as these more hematitic chloritic breccias and gouges, and these very distinct phyllosilicate rich little shear zones. So quite interesting. So yeah, could really capture a lot of information from a drill hole. So this just to give you a bit of an idea. I managed to get a lot of structural data out of these holes. Fortunately, they were oriented. The guys were drilling them, so I could do that. But yeah, so just to give you an idea, managed to get a rather significant structural data set, and also managed to get different rock types logged and alteration recorded. So we also collected a number of what they call potassium argon geochronology samples. I'll talk about it a little bit later, just so we could date some of the structures. So after that period in the logging drill core, we went to go do field work on the island, and it was quite a beautiful drive from Trondheim. We went through, just on this map, I'll show you the series of these fjords, which obviously relate. They're much younger than the Caledonian. They relate to the ice sheets and glaciation of the last few ice ages. But you can still see some remnants of the old Caledonian mountains, and really, it's quite mind-blowing to think that those mountains were fairly similar to the Himalayas today. So you can imagine the Mount Everest being eroded down and almost completely removed. Anyways, beautiful, but you have to mostly get through the fjords with ferries. And Smyrla Island itself falls into what's known as the Strandflat, which is this very interesting geomorphological feature along the coast. It's almost completely flat. And you go inland and you get these really significant topographic features. The mountains get much higher. They don't really understand why it exists, but yeah, anyways, but the island is basically a flat pancake. There's a whole bunch of wind parks. It's a very windy place, a bit like Cape Town, I guess. But perfect because there's no obstacles for the wind. And yeah, so we managed to visit a series of outcrops, which I was showing on the map earlier as those green dots. The outcrop's pretty poor. It's most of the area you get these erosional features from the ice. So really striated, sort of this undulating flat topography. But within it, you get these structures that have cut across. And in a few places, they have some remnants of the original structures. These have also been strongly weathered during the Mesozoic. So you get this saprolite development occurring along these structures. So quite a challenging place to get decent structural data. But as well, while we were there, the weather was always pretty poor. So there's a few days where it was sunny, but most days it was raining. So quite a tough place. And I was there in the summer, so as well you get the midges. So they're trying to eat you alive constantly. But anyways, just to give you an idea of somewhat what the rocks look like, you get from these Monza granites due to these quite amazing mega breccias, these alkali feldspar granites. If I remember correctly, these were amphibolites, these little blocks inside. And then you get gabbros, and in places these foliated cataclasites, and all the way through to these mylonites. This, I'm sure, was originally a diorite. Actually, it's quite a dioritic composition. So quite a variable number of rocks, but most of them very much are from the Ipodus ocean related units. So yeah, but just to give you a bit of an idea as well, that these outcrops were heavily fractured, and that was really what we were interested in. Obviously, some of them, because of the road cuts, some of the fracturing was blast related, but even so, we could collect some really good structural data sets and also look at more significant deformation features, such as these normal faults interacting with these flat-lying shears. We could collect a lot of kinematic data from the fracture surfaces, and also just get a good feel on the cross-cutting relationships. And we were really looking at the mineral coatings on each of these fractures and veins. So trying to just unravel the whole story. Just a few more pictures of what some of these look like. There's a nice normal fault next to my supervisor, Giulio Viola. So I don't know if some of you might know him from UCT back in the day, but yeah, as well as some nice little thickened side features. So we got these calcite little steps that we could track the kinematics from, and as well as there's quite a nice picture of an aplite vein getting offset by these epidote veins. And yeah, just a few more nice pictures. Yeah, so these epidotes second side second lines. So the epidote, we got several generations of epidote, really quite interesting. As well as these really well developed, more chloritic shear zones, and as well as zeolite and calcite, and then these much later calcite features. And we managed to collect a whole series of thin sections from outcrops as well as the drill core. And they were really helpful for us to try and unravel sort of the chronology of the deformation, and also just to get the mineralogy down quite well. So you could see that there were multiple epidote events. These ultracataclasites being reworked by later epidote, quite extraordinary actually. As well as these more brittle ductile features reworking the epidotes, cerussite and chlorite. And then a change to more brittle conditions, these hematite chlorite breccias and gouges, and eventually just purely veins, cross-cutting everything. So quite a clear transition in terms of mineralogy and also deformation style. And we could really put it together. I know this is quite complex, apologize, but just to get an idea, get all these different minerals that have formed, mineralized at different times, and are associated with very specific deformation styles. And we could unravel at least 5 separate deformation events related to this work. And along with that, we could see some very specific structural trends as well. So with the epidote prehnite changing into the more phyllosilicate chloritic times. And then I won't get into too many details here, but very distinctly we can see a tectonic record story coming out of the data. So just to try and tie this into absolute times, so we got a fairly good relative chronology, but to get an absolute chronology, we collected these potassium argon samples. And potassium, obviously radiogenic potassium, decays to argon at a set rate, which I cannot remember now. But potassium is quite useful because it's present in orthogenic potassium-bearing clay minerals. And orthogenesis, of course, is when a mineral grows out of a fluid. So we can assume, well, we make the assumption that at least some of the clay minerals have grown out of a fluid during a faulting episode. So it's a good way to try and to date active faulting events. So we would obviously try and sample these gouges, particularly clay-rich gouges from different structures in the field, as well as in the drill core, with a very specific focus on trying to get different orientations as well as different mineralogies. And using that, I know this slide's quite complex, so I won't get into too many detail. I can talk about it later if anyone's interested. But basically, we could pick out different time episodes from the late Carboniferous to the Triassic, Jurassic, into the Cretaceous, where clay minerals would have grown. And typically with potassium argon chronology, you would subdivide the fault gouge sample into different size fractions, with the largest size fraction possibly involving inherited material from the host rock. So sometimes potassium feldspar would contaminate the sample, so you would see it here. But typically the finest size fraction relates to the orthogenic event, so it's the most reliable. We can also look at the samples in terms of the strike orientation. So I've just plotted this as a radial plot, but these are strikes. So the orientation of the structure that we sampled, and these are the dips next to them. So some are fairly steeply dipping, some are quite flat lying. And again, we can see some trends. For example, these north-northeast, south-southwest, and the northwest-southeast structures typically have the youngest orthogenic ages associated with them. So yeah, we could tie it all together into a bit of a tectonic story for this portion of for Smyrna and the wider margin. And so I've just tried to represent those as these cartoons. And we have D1, which is related to the epidote prehnite. Obviously, we can associate it with this late Caledonian, let me just do the whole slide. The late Caledonian collapse, and you're getting basin development, extension occurring. You get these phyllosilicate rich, the sericite chlorides related to two very distinctive events about 100 million years apart on sinistral faulting on the Moray-Trondelag fault complex. So a very more cryptic dextral event, which is a bit less understood, but certainly preserved, very strange. And then this much later dip-slip faulting on the Moray-Trondelag and crossflow extension related to just before the Greenland and Norway broke apart in the Paleogene. So all quite clear you could get from this from Smola, which is quite good. So the current state where I'm with the project right now is to take all of this that we managed to unravel and use it as what's could be considered a deterministic data set. So it's based in actual geology, and then to see if it's possible to model this tectonic story using some software, and then potentially apply it to the offshore. So to take the lessons that we've learned from Smola and then look at the offshore domain, which is where the oil and gas industry are most interested, I guess. So I've been doing what's known as discrete fracture network modeling. It's quite a complex story. I can talk about it more afterwards if anyone's interested. But basically, we can represent the fracture and vein orientations using statistics. And yeah, I'm using a very specific type of discrete fracture network modeling, which is the grown DFN, which is a fairly new development, I would say. And yeah, just been working with a company called WSP. I was in Edinburgh last year for 3 months working at the office. They used to be Golder Associates. Some of you might be familiar. But anyways, but we could effectively backstrip from the current situation on Smola back through time with different fractures and veins and faults, and try and understand what the basement rock volume looked like. And the grown DFN is also very useful because they have the time attribute that you can bring in, as well as you can get each fracture to terminate or to crosscut another one based on rules that you decide on. And we get those rules from actual outcrops and the data that we were collecting in the field. And once you have these models, which are known as static models, you can then look at them for different characteristics. For example, we're looking at hydraulic conductivity. This is quite complex. I don't want to get into too many details, but basically you can study the volume that you've created, and because the fractures are stochastic, they follow statistical rules. You can generate what they call Monte Carlo simulations. So you can do literally 100 different fracture simulations and then get a range of conditions. So that's what we're working on right now. And hopefully I'll have a paper on this finished quite soon. But yeah, but anyways, going into more tourism vibes. So just spending that time on Smola, I was there for a few weeks. It was quite an interesting place. Very harsh conditions. I think the people who live there Must have been very tough back in the day. But the island is still heavily oriented towards fishing. So obviously you get all the Atlantic cod, pollock, I think it's called. And they do there's a lot of tourism, particularly German tourists come with their camper vans and go fishing. So it's a very interesting place. There's also a very strong Viking feeling there. There's a Viking monument. Unfortunately, I just don't have a picture of it, but there's an old, I think it's a burial mound on the island, but it's the first time that the word Norway is actually used. And that dates back to, I think, about the 9th century or 10th century. So yeah, very interesting place, very beautiful, just very harsh. The rain and the wind is quite consistent every day. So you need a very good hat to keep your ears warm, basically. And then obviously the food is quite distinctive. Yeah, I had to try this is a whale pizza, these little pieces of whale. So of course, Norway is still one of the few countries which do actively still do whaling. I know some of you might find this a bit abhorrent, so I apologize. But along with that, they do a lot of this dried fish, which is a bit rotten. It really stinks, but I suppose it's their version of biltong, or I think it's buchum, which is not buchum. Get the name of the West Coast dried fish, but anyways, and of course, after every long hard day in the field, we'll be drinking some local beer from Trondheim. So and of course, I have to say, there was the craziest thing about being there in summer is it was always sunny. This was about as dark as it would get. This was about just about 3 in the morning. So definitely face masks are essential. But the Norwegians I was with, they really love the sun. And my supervisor as well, he was really quite obsessed with it. He had spent 13 years working in Norway. And yeah, they like to keep all the curtains open all night long. And yeah, I suppose the brutal winters, they really try and soak up as much vitamin D as possible. But anyways, just to give you a few things about Bologna, where I'm right now. Yeah, yeah, it's been quite a interesting time here. But basically, my supervisor was the link between Bologna University and the Geological Survey of Norway. So there's been quite a long-standing work connection, partnership between the two institutions. But Bologna is quite it's the oldest university in the world, continually functioning university. It was founded in 1088, so pretty old. It's also one of the first places where doctorates were awarded. I think the University of Paris was the other one. So really quite an interesting place. There's a lot of history here. The original university building is known as the Archigymnasium. They also have, I think, one of the oldest anatomical study rooms in the world, where the guys used to go in the middle of the night and go grave rob poor people who had just died. But certainly a very, very interesting place to study and to spend time. There's beautiful libraries here as well. But Bologna itself is a very interesting city, very old Roman town known as Bononia, but really flourished during the Middle Ages. Very rich trading place, and very famous for, of course, the porticos, portici, and the statue of Neptune, I should have got a little closer up, but the Maserati car brand was originally from Bologna, and the trident of Neptune is, of course, Maserati's emblem. But again, yeah, great place to study. It's difficult sometimes to focus because obviously there's such beautiful food here, such as the tortellini and the bolognese sauce. But yeah, I still haven't got too fat, I guess, living here. But obviously, John mentioned I had to talk about the wine. So I've spent a bit of time going around Italy, and particularly down in Abruzzo and Calabria, which is right down in the sort of the southeastern toe of Italy. And I spent a bit of time. My girlfriend's family, they work on, well, they own this small wine farm, which is quite an interesting wine production technique. It's known as heroic winemaking, and it's they have these vineyards on these crazy slopes. I mean, the views are quite amazing, and the geology again is quite amazing. But they're completely non-mechanized. Everything is done by hand, and it's a very old style and very yeah, small production. But the wine is excellent, and yeah, the types of grapes, yeah, they're quite unique there as well. I think the one is known as Calabrese. It's only really farmed around that area. But yeah, it's great. You can go do wine tasting. This is actually a picture from Abruzzo. So lots of wine farms up there. But just close by to this wine farm, there's a really amazing Byzantine church in a place called Stilo. But I could talk about this stuff for a long time. But just looking at again at some geotourism in Abruzzo, there's a really extraordinary mountain called the Gran Sasso in the Apennine Mountains, which is a mountain range which extends all the way from Calabria up, yeah, effectively to Genoa or Nice on the French coast. But this area, it's yeah, extraordinary geology. It all relates to yeah, they call it the Apennine orogeny, where the Adriatic plate is being thrust under the I forget the name of the other one, but anyway, extraordinary geology, a great place to go spend time around. And also there's a bit of history in this place. This is they're called Campo Imperatore. Any of you know a bit of World War II history? This is where Mussolini was captured and placed in this little hotel before the German paratroopers came and rescued him on this very small little field with gliders. So yeah, the place is just full of extraordinary geology and history, and yeah. Anyway, I've been enjoying the time here. So just a few more last few pictures of some geology around the Gran Sasso. You get obviously it's all carbonates. You can see some bivalve fossils in these rocks. This is right up at the top of the mountain, so quite extraordinary, as well as these really quite extraordinary cataclastic. Yeah, these are little chert nodules which have been bitterly deformed. Just to get in some places, these imbricated, more sandy, moldy layers, which sort of are a good analogy for the overall structural setting of this mountain range. And of course, some beautiful, very angular chevron folding in places. So quite a awesome place to go and do geology. And I can certainly recommend, if any of you can get a holiday from South Africa to Italy, to spend a bit of time between drinking wine and eating the food to also go have a look at some of the geology. It's a really extraordinary place. But yeah, I think that's all for me. So thank you very much for your attention. Thanks.
Thank you, Matthew. Any questions you can from the audience here? I'd just like to know the anagram MTFC. What does it stand for?
Should I reshare? So could you just say that again? Sorry. MTFC.
MTFC, capital letters, yes.
Yeah, so that's the More Trondelag fault complex, which is it's a major shear zone that runs through. It formed sort of at the breakup, the late so not breakup, the late Caledonian orogenic collapse. It sort of accommodated
the sitting center on most of your slides there. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
You guys.
Yeah, happy to answer any questions. So
yes, if you can just text it, if you can't unmute yourself and just ask, or just text it here and we can read it. Most fascinating. Thank you very, very much.
Matthew, just can I come in handy? Matthew, it's John Brister here. Just give us some age perspectives there. You talk about Caledonian. I mean, what age is that in an absolute number?
Yeah, so the Caledonian, it sort of ranges between 430 million years old to about 400. So it sort of well, it occurred over about 100 million years, but the Standian phase, which is really related to what I've been looking at, is sort of from 430 million years all the way through to about 400. So it's Ordovician to Silurian, which is slightly younger than the Cape orogeny, I think. Yeah.
And I guess from a rock perspective, it's quite interesting to see how fresh and striking those features are. I presume a lot of that goes hand in hand with the cold climate, so you don't have this tropical or temperate weathering that we'd have in a place like Southern Africa.
Well, it's quite an interesting point you just bring up, because there was at one point. So Baltica was over the equator. Well, Baltica Laurentia was over the equator around the Triassic. So there are these small remnants of this very deep weathering profile. And the oil and gas guys are particularly interested in it because offshore it's a bit more preserved below the younger basin sediments, and those weathered portions, they have a higher porosity, so potential I suppose reservoir volumes. So they've been looking at those, but on Smyrna itself, it's been pretty much just planed off by the ice. It's you do get a lot of, I think the mechanical weathering has caused a lot of the outcrops to sort of get quite degraded, but we do have a road that's cut through them. You get quite a nice exposure. Yeah, certainly. Yeah.
I see Doug says he worked at Sulitjelma copper mines. Do you know anything about that?
Sorry, say again.
I can't say that name. It looks like Sulitjelma copper mine to the north of where you are, of your area. Do you know anything about it?
If I just go to the map, is it on this map? or
He says just to the north of you.
okay. No, I mean, I know there's a few mineral deposits associated with the Caledonian. I'm not surprised. There's but I personally don't know much about it. But I know you get a lot of these organic rich continental units, which were sort of thrust up into the whole NAP sequence. And then you had some fluid moving through that. So a lot of these organic, lovely organic rich units to provide sulfides for the, or sulfur for the sulfide system. So yeah, I can believe it, yeah, for sure.
Gary van Aswegen is in the audience. I was waiting for our local fracture mechanic to ask you something on.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, and maybe I can start it, Matthew. I mean, I'm fascinated by the technology and the level of structural analysis you're doing today. And maybe, it'd be nice to hear Mike Watkey's comment, who's a classical, old school structural geologist, very good at it. But, does that mean you collect lots of data in the field, dips and strikes, and plug it all into a big model?
Yes,
Michael?
well, you have to be quite careful how you do it. So if I just go back to, let me go back to this slide, these two slides. So we try to build quite a robust framework to split up the structural data, and certainly the structures are very much polyphase features. So they've been reactivated multiple times, and you get sort of that concept. And I try to we're trying to bring this into the modeling, this fracture saturation that happens where eventually you have so much fracturing in the rock that nothing new forms. It's purely just reactivation of pre-existing fractures. But we try to apply a bit of a framework and then split up the data as carefully as possible. We've also got all the drill hole data, but of course I've tried to just be a bit careful with the drill hole data because of you get a lot of error and bias that comes in, such as the Terzaghi bias. So basically you don't sample, or you don't see a lot of the steeper structures. You're picking up mostly the flat-lying stuff. But we try to collect as many I'd say high confidence structural measurements in the field and in drill core. But it's quite complex, I must say.
I'm sure, Michael, your comment? Mike Watkins, are you there?
I know Mike from the old Zambia days. So I don't think I've ever met Joe. We've never met, but he worked on some same projects as me up in Zambia.
Yeah.
I'm very curious to hear his opinion.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I was muted because I've got dogs that bark their heads off here. Yeah, Matt, how are you, man?
Oh, very well, thanks.
Yeah, no, we work together metaphorically on the same stuff, but at different times. Yeah, this is sort of stuff I'm doing at the moment for exploration and mining companies. Trying to work out the fracture systems and which way fluids are flowing, stuff like that. It's really interesting. Right? But you have the advantage, of course, that we actually get some decent dating done as well.
Yes.
It's really nice.
Michael,
Good work.
Michael, are you still doing it the old way, with stereograms and so on?
Well, he's also got them. Have you noticed that? Or did you switch off then, John? Yeah, I mean, you start off with that. We've fortunately got get orientated drill cores, so you can work on that and then go through what fractures are occurring, when, the mineralogy associated with them, just what Matt is doing. And then, of course, we're really interested in fluid flow directions, if you can get that as well. So you know which way the mineralizing fluids come from, which helps a lot. But this is neat work. I mean, I take my hat off to you. You know, I've worked in Scandinavia, and it's a bloody nightmare with those bitey things.
Yeah, absolutely. I was wearing a peak cap a lot of the time, and they seem to really love eating your forehead.
No,
And,
you need to get those Aussie sort of bee-eating outfits, I think, at certain times of year.
I mean, in Zambia,
you want full coverage.
Yeah, because in Zambia you get the mbulubulu, which are these sweat bees. But they don't bite you. They're just irritating. But the midges, what's so crazy is it takes a few days for the bites to actually, I don't know, manifest. And so the bottom of your hands where you've been holding your field notebook and your compass get eaten alive in your forehead. It's really extraordinary. But
life's easy in Africa, huh?
Yeah.
I remember 1970 in the career I was going along before. I was a geologist training with the Canadian Defence Force, and just getting on a canoe to go into the middle of a lake in order to be able to eat something without actually being eaten yourself at lunchtime by these midges. A nightmare.
That's brutal.
A little bit of a curve one here. For the non-geologists and the public that's been listening to you, this very highly academic and pure technical stuff that you're doing, where do you see it eventually applied, for the better of mankind?
Yeah, sure. So there's two sort of avenues that this work can go down. So on the one hand, of course, it's for the oil and gas guys, because there's been quite a bit of focus in the past, and I mean it's decreased now slightly, but it's certainly there on these what they call the basement. There just haven't been a focus for previous exploration. So it's just to determine whether or not they're even worth looking at. So this work should shed some light. And my project's is actually the third iteration of a very long running project, which is known as the base project, which has been a number of PhDs have been done on it. A lot of guys have been doing postdoc work. So there's that side, and then there's the non-oil and gas related side, which is understanding how fluids might move through crystalline basement rocks related to nuclear waste storage. So of course, you don't want any fluids carrying off radioactive material. So there's been a lot of work in Scandinavia on this, and I think in South Africa as well, in a place called Valputs. And the guys I was working with in the UK, WSP, they very much focused on the nuclear waste side of things. But there's also the other side, which is geothermal energy. So it's to understand, again, because basement rocks, they have a lot of radioactive minerals in them. So they get quite hot. They're very good if you want to pump water down and then heat up and then potentially get geothermal energy out of them. So there's a whole range of things. Personally, I'm quite interested in the either oil and gas or the nuclear waste side of things, because I think it's there's some really sort of cutting edge work going on in those two fields at the moment. Yeah, but I mean, I'll just go back to this modeling down at the bottom. Yeah, so I mean, it's not really been done before, where they've tried to work out a sort of a temporal idea of what happened. So certain fractures and say conduits in the crust were more permeable in the past, and just to try and understand that, looking at the situation today is it's quite a novel idea actually. So hopefully my PhD will provide some insights. Yeah.
And Matthew,
just answered your question.
Just an extension on that, Matthew, just a comment about Norway's economy. I mean, it's a very slick, smart country, and they've really managed their natural resources, very smartly and creatively.
Yes. So it's quite extraordinary, because most of the energy in Norway is actually completely green. A lot of it's from hydropower, and also a lot of wind energy. So their oil and gas is actually a very small component of their energy mix. They mostly export it, and they invest almost everything that they make from it into a national sovereign fund. So they're in a very good position in terms of I suppose economically and politically because of that. And it's interesting because you compare it against some other countries such as Angola or Nigeria, which have similar sort of oil and gas reserves as Norway. They just have two very different approaches, but it's certainly I would say a good model to try and follow. Yeah, very interesting. And you see it really in places like Trondheim. All the taxis are Teslas because they are subsidized by the government, and you have these really expensive Tesla cars which are charging their power off hydropower. So yeah, it's a very interesting country, I must say, in that way.
I mean, it does also help you've only got 5 million people.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, no, for sure.
Okay, Henny, do you want to wrap up? Thanks, Matt.
It's been a great pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, that was wonderful. And thanks.
What's the next talk? What's the next talk, John?
I think it's going to be the one live in the Harold Porter Gardens in April, Henny, or in April. So we'll be making people aware of that.
Okay, that'll be on Zoom as well.
Well, we're gonna do it on Zoom, but we're gonna tape it separately, Henny, because
Okay. Understood.
the reception in Harold Porter Gardens is not that good, but people will be well informed.
Right, everybody, thank you very much for attending. We see you at Harold Porter Gardens or the one after that.
All right, thank you.